Wait.
Let's get started.
All right. Welcome to our second seminar in our Cyber Lunch series, hosted by Temple's College of Science and Technology and the Office of the Vice President for Research. Great to see everyone. I'm Steve Nappy, Associate Vice President for Technology Commercialization and Business Development. I sit within the research arm of Temple University, which conducts over 275 million in research annually. In the past 5 years, Temple Research has produced over 400 discoveries and generated 22 new businesses. These companies serve as vehicles to advance Temple technology to market while contributing to our local economy and bringing additional support to our R&D efforts here at Temple. For example, these new businesses add to a portfolio of companies that attracted more than 140 million in funding over the same 5-year period, advancing the development of new medical devices, virtual platforms for those with autism, a remote management system for COVID-19 patients, several therapeutics, and a potential curative treatment for certain viral infections, such as HIV. Innovation benefits from an active and engaged ecosystem, one that draws in the latest trends from our industry and other external partners, and internally from a growing research engine that also connects to and enhances the education of our students. Now more than ever, cyber will be threaded into these innovation and company creation efforts. So we are pleased to partner on this Cyber Lunch program with Mary Grace Giraldo, who will discuss the Cyber Defense and Information Assurance Program, Cyber DIA, as it brings visibility to the career pathways enabled by Cyber DIA, alongside the many other educational programs here at Temple. Grace?
Thank you, Stephen. First of all, I want to thank everyone for participating today in Cyber Lunch. I'm Mary Grace Giraldo, the Cyber Defense and Information Assurance Professional Science Master's Program Director at the Computer and Information Science Department. So in short, we call it with love Cyber DIA because the name is way too long. But Cyber Lunch is a speaker series where Temple University and industry partners come together to discuss cybersecurity industry trends. So our goals are to align Temple University in the industry cyber map, right? We want to elevate Temple and as a place to get an education, bridge the industry cybersecurity workforce gaps through training, showcase our Temple students to our industry partners, expand our networks with each other and with our students, the pipeline, showcase the program Cyber Defense and Information Assurance, and our research program within Temple. So before we get started, I'd like to thank our advisory board and committee members. So we have to thank a few names, so I'm just gonna go straight down. Scott Levon, CEO of Clone Systems. Say hey if you're out there. I may not have given them a chance.
Hey guys.
Carmelia Henry, she's Risk, Regulatory and Compliance Data Privacy Consultant.
Hello, good afternoon.
Grace Okovia, Head of Technology and Cyber Risk Management from TD Bank. She may not be here today. Derek Fisher, VP and Cybersecurity Leader at InvestNet.
Hello.
Javier Suarez, VP of the Greater Philadelphia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Bana Kurana, Cloud Security Architecture at Vanguard. Mr. Colin Congo, Special Agent with the SBI. Mr. Robert Hanley, VP Solutions Engineering at Sabre Systems. I also want to say hi to our committee member where we work together making these events happen. So there's a team that does these cyber lunches, and there's also another team that are a group of folks that manage the Cyber DIA program. So Lee Flagg, Dr. Flagg, she's also one of our panelists today.
Hi.
Sarah Lehman, Cyber DIA professor.
Howdy.
And Dominic Klizer, IST Online Program Director. So Steve, I want to send it back to you to.
Terrific. So if we can advance to the next slide and move to our our panel discussion, which I'm excited to introduce, which will go over cyber threats and investigation. So our panelists for today include Supervisory Special Agent Suhail Daud, who oversees the FBI's Philadelphia Criminal Cyber Squad. We have Mark Gibble of the Southeast Computer Crime Unit within the Pennsylvania State Police Bureau of Criminal Investigation. We have Lee Flagg, as Grace just mentioned, Assistant Professor of Computer and Information Sciences here at Temple University. And we have Mark Wheeler, Chief Information Officer for the City of Philadelphia. Grace will moderate this panel, so I'll kick it back over to her to launch the discussion.
Oh, excellent, excellent. So the first thing we want to do is do a round robin of, share a little bit to the panelists, share a little bit about yourself, and give us some insights in what you've been doing in cyberspace and any relationship with Temple University as well. Who wants to start?
I'll start. I'm Dr. Lee Flagg, and I'm, as he said, an assistant professor. But in my previous life, I was the head of research and development for a small cybersecurity firm. We developed several different cybersecurity platforms, including mostly for the Missile Defense Agency. So we were able to actually deploy all of these systems, an intrusion detection system, a software assurance platform, and a malware detection capability. We did that for DARPA. So I'm the sort of, obviously, the defense industry kind of voice here. That's most of my experience. And I'm excited to talk about that and just learn some more from all of you.
Okay, I guess I'll go next. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Suhail Daud. I'm an FBI agent. Currently, I supervise in Philadelphia the FBI Cyber Squad, which is handling all criminal investigations when it comes to cyber field. So with that, I oversee for the federal crime for East Pennsylvania from Philadelphia to Harrisburg, so that area for the federal cyber crime. Prior to this, let me start the other way. Actually, I have a degree in electrical engineering and computer engineering. I graduated a long time ago. I guess it's all relative. I graduated in 2000. So after that, I was an engineer for a while. I did some programming in automotive industry, and then I joined the FBI in 2004 in Chicago. There I was working national security investigations. And then I moved to our headquarters in Washington, D.C. in 2011. There I was overseeing counterterrorism investigation using cyber techniques. And then from there, I was very lucky to get the opportunity to be a diplomat. And I was assigned to the US Embassy in New Delhi, India for 4 years, representing the FBI, where I was the liaison between FBI and all the law enforcement intel partners in India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Nepal. I also say Bhutan, but nothing really happened there. It was a very happy place. And finally, after that, I was very lucky to get the opportunity to come here to Philadelphia and oversee the cybercrime. Happy to discuss with you guys. I think the cybercrime is one of those things that the only way we beat it is by education, because there's just too many vectors for people to get in. Thanks.
Mark.
Oh,
Yeah.
there we go. Yeah. I'm Mark Gibble. I'm with the Pennsylvania State Police Computer Crime Unit. I've been a trooper for over 12 years. About 10 of those have been some form of investigations, whether drug investigations or just a general detective. The last 3 years I've done criminal investigations involving the use of computer and computer infrastructure, as well as a lot of forensic analysis. I'm actually sitting at the courthouse right now. I was on the stand up until 12:01. I'm part of the U.S. Secret Service's Cyber Fraud Task Force. I've done some presentations was supposed to do more before COVID. And just when you're asking questions, most of my experience at the state level, while I do have experience with some intrusions and whatnot, think crimes that would be prosecuted, here in Philadelphia or in Harrisburg, whether that be bomb threats or misuse of a system by an employee, or things that might be physically contained within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Hi, I'm Mark Wheeler. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the City of Philadelphia. Prior to that, I've worked for most of my career in the nexus between data and analysis and urban planning. So that my background and experience in technology was built over time just as a need to kind of satisfy my ability to solve problems in that planning and community engagement space. And there's something really gratifying and tangible to have numbers and data and maps to work with, because my master's degree really focused on geographic information system and analysis, as opposed to a lot of the intractable problems that we deal with in the community and urban planning space. So it's always been a great balance for me. On the cybersecurity side for the city, I've led the creation of multiple new teams under our cybersecurity director, so we can do our own investigations and forensic analysis. We have a compliance and policy unit as well, and then drive education, and then all of the support and technical response that operations needs for any of the platforms that we're managing. And for Temple, I sit on an advisory board for the Masters in GIS program.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. So I want to start by setting the stage. Today, we're going to be talking with government, cyber threats or incidents, and then we're going to share perspective about investigations. So current investigations, future or ideal investigations. So I'm going to ask the panel members to just sort of share an incident or a threat that was followed up with an investigation, and then add your perspectives about, what are some of the current investigation approaches, like what data do we use, or what methodology or law enforcement influences. Then talk about, future, what's ideal, what should we be investigating, what's the data that we should be tracking, kind of thing. Please share about prevalent behaviors that increase risk, any preventive or defensive measures that we can use to reduce risk, and what are some of the challenges that we have, right? And this is a dialogue. You don't have to wait for me to just kind of feed into the conversation. So folks, I forgot to mention the format. We will have the panel discussions for 30 minutes, followed by Q&A by our participants through the chat. So let's get started. Who wants to start with an anecdotal story?
All right.
I'll start. Oh, go ahead. Go
ahead, Mark.
All right. Some of you heard this yesterday. I failed to mention, I'm also task force with a federal agency here in the Philadelphia area, which allows me to expand my reach. Me personally, as a state trooper and a task force officer, I can take cases that end up in New Jersey or somewhere else. We had a case that's now resolved at a large Department of Defense contract here in the Philadelphia area, who had a employee, they had narrowed it down themselves, had an employee who was reaching out online to a bunch of blacklisted IP addresses resulting back to China and Russia. And just given the nature of this contract, they should not even be going to these sites, let alone sharing data. So what the company did was very good. This is a best case scenario. They have a security team who's very tied into the network and network administrators, and they worked very much as a team. Since they had an idea of who it was, they used a employee investigation software to archive everything. They archived when the man sat down, when he logged in, what all his keystrokes were. He logged into a personal account, got that unique password, and basically just trailed him for several days and got the information that they needed, which oftentimes is harder after the fact. And if you see something live, it's easier to capture it while it's happening than to go back and try to piece it together. That may be impossible with encryption and whatnot. So they did all this, and they got a good idea. They also did, thinking outside of the network format. They have secure access in their building, so they were able to see what room is he in, what section of the campus is he at. So they physically sent someone out from the security team to see him. He also had his phone was monitored by the company, so they knew where his phone was. Physically saw him at the desktop, at the machine. We're able to document that. So by the time they came to us, it wasn't a matter of national security per se, but this man who had a lot of physical access, he had probably a basic level of network access. He was kind of the end of the supply chain kind of guy. He was viewing child exploitation material, child sexual abuse images and videos, and that was the data transfer back and forth. So from there, the work's been done for us. There's no threat. There could be a compromise by that employee is definitely compromised. But we were able just to do our basic search warrants for the devices that were used, the cell phone, to see if there's any live child victims. But we were able to do all that because everything was captured. And then as a forensic analyst myself, I didn't actually do this, the analyst, I did end up making the rest. The desktop itself had very few forensic artifacts, just the way this man was accessing this illegal material. It was all done on the screen in the cloud. And a lot of the artifacts that we typically look for in a traditional exploitation case like that weren't there. Partly because of the network was so locked down that he had to just get a skimming overview of what he was looking for. But capturing the data, verifying who the person was, because if you get somebody else's credentials, it could be somebody else, and then preserving all that information for us saved us following a trail that would have taken us probably a different direction initially, getting after all the IP addresses, but getting to the bottom of that. And in that instance, that case was not prosecuted federally. It was prosecuted at the Commonwealth level, which I was able to do, and just as an assist from really 4 different disciplines all at once coming together just to take care of the issue.
Can I ask a question? So was this all in the investigation or in their investigation? Was there like someone who noticed this behavior and reported that, or was it all done just through IT, or they recognized that this was he was going on the internet at a time when he shouldn't be? So I'm curious.
So it was more. It's a great question. Coming from your defense background, basically any IP from China or Russia should not have been accessed in this department. It was that secure. So that's what it initially raised the red flag.
I think that's a great example of a case where we talked about this I think yesterday briefly, but the amount of work that has to be done for prosecuting cases legally can be daunting for an agency in terms of legal processes. So anything that can be done prior to legal process beginning. So before we get in, if the company is proactive and they have all the logs and they have all the NDA signed and they're able to extract that information, that we don't have to go to court, even though the company is willing to give it to us for it to be admitted into court, we have to follow legal process. I think that's a good example of where when you have a proactive company who's using all the tools available, it also makes the case easy to prosecute. And the goal is to really, like, from a investigator and a prosecutor's perspective, goal is to actually not go to trial. The goal is to actually get it resolved before it goes to trial, because that's a lot of energy, a lot of money, a lot of resources that goes into a case when it goes to trial. Um, so I listened to your question. I thought of how to answer your question. What I'd like to do is I'd like to actually step back a little bit and go over an overview of cyber threat, and then talk about the trends that we are seeing, and then give an example of those trends with a specific case, and then really circle back to an overwhelming theme in cyber investigations. I have a lot here, so I don't want to, take up all the time. So please jump in at any time. And I honestly, I would love it if you guys made this a conversation. Um, so, so from our perspective, from a federal agency's perspective, cybercrime really, like, very generically falls into two categories. And I'm talking about specific cybercrime. I'm not talking about counterterrorism, espionage, or drugs. All of these have, cyber aspect. They all have it. So really everything can be cybercrime. But I'm talking about specific cybercrime. Falls into two major broad categories. One is your national security, and the second is your criminal. National security, think of, probably one of the biggest threats to our country today, when it comes to a threat to elections, a foreign government interference into our election. Um, if you guys are not aware of APTs, the advanced persistent threats, these are the threats that are coming from foreign adversaries, where the goal is monetary, sure, but really it is a much bigger goal, and the damage is, it's much more lasting in a society. So that's one aspect of cyber investigation. That's where you have APTs, you have interference from the foreign government, and all of that. The second aspect, the part that I oversee for East Pennsylvania, is your criminal aspect. Now, when we look at criminal cases, the 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 the, the code that governs the prosecution of the cases is Title 18, Section 1030. So I'm just going to briefly go over this, because this is what determines cyber investigations for us. This is the only thing we have when it comes to prosecution. So we have to collect evidence in furtherance of this, which is it's unauthorized computer access or exceeding authorization of a computer access, to obtain financial information, government information, or from a protected computer with intent to commit fraud, steal intellectual properties, or intent to extort. This forms the basis for cyber prosecutions. So the rest of the trend that we'll speak about here, for it to be prosecuted as a cyber crime, it has to fall into this. Of course, we can add wire fraud to it, and mail fraud, and other things which are your traditional, crimes superseding these. So in terms of trends for cyber criminal, the three, from our perspective, the three big trends right now that we are seeing. One is your business email compromises. The second is your malware and your ransomwares. And then the third one is insider threat. So let me briefly give you guys an example of a case that we're working on. Unfortunately, I will not be able to go into details because some of these are ongoing. So I was kind of struggling to get some close cases. But we had an area, we had a company in our area that reported to us through our reporting mechanism, which is ic3.gov, and I'll put that in the chat. That's what's used to report cyber crimes. So they reported that they lost $2.2 million. So what happened here was, this was a company that deals with, I'm actually going to make this up, export of tractor parts. Okay, so that's what they do. They sell tractor parts, and sometimes these are big tractors, so there's a lot of money involved. They had an intrusion into their system, and when time came for the money to be remitted to the customer, or the customer sending them the money, at the last moment, the bank account information was changed. So while everything else was same, the bank account gets changed. They sent $2.2 million to a wrong account, and luckily they found out within like few hours, and we were able to get there. So that's a business email compromise, where someone has gotten into your business emails And the whole goal is to actually get into the accounting flow and change that at the last moment so the money is sent to a different account. The second is ransomware. Most of you have heard of it in one way or the other. Ransomwares are your malwares, like your programs which are designed to disrupt a computer, lock up a computer. We had an area company, a major company. One day, all the employees came in and no one could log into the computer. Everyone got a big screen saying, hey, your computer is locked up. Send money to this Bitcoin address and let's start negotiating. So again, same thing. The actors were in the system for a while, and at some point they decided to, what we say, detonate the ransomware, and suddenly everything gets encrypted. There is no way to break it. I mean, you could brute force it, but I mean, it's years of brute force. You can't break it. And in one case, now just think of this number. They paid $37 million to unlock their computers. All right. I mean, so not even five, I would say 3 years ago, if someone paid $35,000, we'd be like, oh my God, they paid $35,000. Today, I think a CEO of a company will write $35,000 from his personal bank account to end it if he could. So that's another one. The third one is kind of what Mark was referring to. It's the insider threat. It's when you have somebody on the inside. We just had a case where this is, again, kind of crazy. Major company, they fired an individual, okay? But they never revoked his access. So for next 2 years, he came into work. I don't know why, like we couldn't determine what he was doing with the data, but I don't know, he was telling someone he's going to work. For 2 years, he was coming in and he was stealing data. He had an office, right? He had an access in and out of the building. And for next 2 years, he sat in the office, not collecting a paycheck, working in the company. Again, due to some, his computer hit the network in the wrong IPs, and we were able to get there. The common thread in all of these is that none of these required some advanced level of intrusion, advanced level of an attack. These were all, the last one was a guy just whose access was not revoked. That should have been done. The first two with the millions of dollars of loss was through social engineering and phishing emails. So these are very preventable mechanisms for. Go ahead. I'm thinking you have a question. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you and Mark. So, the level of sophistication of attacks, this is what I found, when I started on this road is, these were just like kids who would, download, malware. It wasn't theirs. They didn't make it. This was years ago. And, they just release it into the wild or try to steal stuff from people. So I'm curious about how sophistication has escalated, because, of course, we have all of, like OPM breach and all those really very sophisticated, cyber, takeovers. But on the whole, it always seemed to me that these lower level ones, they were, it wasn't anyone doing anything all that sophisticated, and it wasn't all them. They just decided they wanted $37 million.
So even with those big breaches, right, where those massive breaches, I would say over 95%, there was a study done on 95% of them were done through the lowest common denominator, which is people clicking on links. I mean, as silly as that sounds, you can have the best lock on your door, right? If you don't lock it, it doesn't matter. If you leave the window open, it doesn't matter. You can have the greatest system in the world. Yeah. But if you have an employee clicking on stuff, or you have an insider threat, like it's just very hard to overcome that. And in terms of sophistication of these groups, it's immense. I mean, these ransomwares are pretty much, think of them as franchises. Yeah. And that's really how they are run. There's a group that creates a ransomware, and then they franchise it out to groups that deploy it. Yeah. And so when the money comes in, right, so the money has to go to a Bitcoin address, or in BC, it has to go to bank account. So all of these are franchises of criminal enterprises. Each has a task, and the money is shared not equally, but money is shared between them. So what was one guy in his basement just screwing around is basically in a whole industry running.
Yeah, I find I think that was the most interesting thing that I discovered, and it continues to boggle my mind. As you know, there's that sort of division of I'm creating a business out of creating, this one piece of malware, and I'm going to sell that to so many people, and so there's a whole criminal enterprise that it is different than you
Yeah.
expect as just a layperson trying to understand why this is happening. And I think that so I'm interested in usable security. Clicking on links, that's training. You have to train people, what they need to be looking for, I would say. Um, but if you can't use, if security is difficult to use, you're not going to use it. And that happens so often. That's a huge gap in, how security is deployed. You can lock it up as much as possible, but if no one will use it properly,
Sure.
you're anyone can
Yeah,
walk
no,
on the door.
absolutely right. I mean, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of studies done on your how effective is a super difficult password, right? Like the password with like 15 letters and five. How important is that versus a password which is not guessable, right? These are two different things.
Yeah.
One is a complicated password, and one is a password that's not guessable, right? You don't you. So there's been studies done on it, and it's if you have a password that is not guessable, you are more likely to be secure than you keep a password because you end up writing it somewhere. If I give you a 20 character random number and with pound sign and ats and whatever, as opposed to a phrase from a book that you like, or you reverse the phrase, add a number in between, you'll remember it.
Yeah. Well, and a big thing too for me is policy. So the company that I worked for wrote a lot of policies, around cyber defense and passwords. And, I always found that the more onerous the password policy was, like I remember having to change my password every time I logged in to submit a report to the Air Force. And I was just like, and that's the time when you're just like, I'm going to put in password because this is ridiculous, So I mean, I find all of that very interesting. A,
Yeah.
a question I had too is, so like insider threat training is a big thing, because I was asking that question, did someone notice the person? Were employees trained to pay attention? What? But then you think, how much training do you get before people shut their ears? Like where they just aren't paying, they click through the, online training and they're not paying attention. So I think a lot of that, a lot of issues are in how we approach defining policy for the people who have to use it, defining the training that will help them use it properly. How can we be better at educating people so that they get it? I think that's important, an important aspect of this
I
as
think it's a
well.
very important aspect. I mean, I think that's a big industry right there.
Yeah.
I may be able to chime in
Yeah.
there on the education piece, because that's what we have had to work on very vigorously since I started my tenure as CIO, and prior to that, it hadn't existed yet. And with the increase of the cyber threats that we were seeing in cities, Atlanta and then Baltimore and Allentown had something, and the list goes on and on, that we worked very quickly with consultants to put together a program. And what I think to put the public sector context together for folks is to understand that just like at the federal level, you have the executive branch with its purviews and rules, and then you have a legislative branch and judicial branch. In the public sector, depending on the state and the size of the city, you're going to run into not just three branches, but you're also going to have separately elected offices for many different functions. And none of that may make any sense intuitively. Those were chartered responsibilities written decades ago, and that we still have and we live with. And that for both cyber education and the response, I can't speak to the detail the others have on the response and investigation work, but at the level on which you have to be accountable for that in the public sector, what this comes down to, both with accountability and education, is that every separately elected office has its own culture and its own mandate. and that sets up its own set of complications and conversations that have to be had when you initiate a response, and how you respond to it, and keep the public aware, because there is a responsibility, because you're serving the public, that there is an awareness that they're going to need, but it also has to be balanced with the security that you still need to go through for that investigation process. And quite often, because they're separately elected and they tend to have their own sense of control and want to maintain that control, either introducing new password resets, password complexity, multi-factor authentications, new types of sensor, advanced threat protections or data loss protections, is always a conversation that has to be had, and that's your first foray into the education process, because you basically have to convince them that this is necessary. And can we, as the central executive office, enforce it? Yes, because we control the network. However, that's not the best way to go about it. And I encounter years of resistance to these changes because the former IT regimes were never communicative about this at all. They never treated the customers as a group that needed to be informed, kept informed, and basically closing a loop. If we're going to do something, we need to tell you that we did it and how successful we were. And that's the approach I've been taking with Philadelphia, is that constant communication that helps us introduce the communication. However, enforcement on education isn't something that I can do. We can cut people off the network, but believe me, when it's an elected official and their staff member can't log in, the first thing they're saying is that, like, well, I'll have them get that cybersecurity training done right now so they can get back in. It's always you don't understand what our mandate is and how it has to get done. So there is a constant, I think anyone going into this industry from Temple, if you're going to work with the public sector, of course, corporations have that monetary mandate. Of course, the bottom line means everything and people want to get their work done. I just tend to think that it is a very different conversation that you have to have when it is elected officials and a public-facing public sector for the good of the public operation, because there is always this sense that comes before anything. And security, physical security, has been something people have learned that they needed over time. It's cybersecurity that is still a learning process of why it is absolutely necessary and the underpinning to your operation.
Yeah, I mean, so that what I'm curious about too is you're talking about different cultures. So, if you have a corporate culture, I always found that policy was mandated on the people. Like, this is what we have to do. This is how everything needs to be controlled. We're not going to think about your culture. We're not going to think about your people. We're just going to, create this policy, and you have to do it. You just have to. And so I think there's a lot of that too, that pushback of, well, why? That's not what we believe in. That's not, we need to do this. So, I mean, I think that's an interesting area where, how do you involve the user, the person who actually has to follow this policy, so that you can get them on board? Like, how do you, that's just a question. Like, how do we do that?
I think that you involve, it's constant communication, but you also have to think about can we get to the policy implementation another way? And I think user-centered design practices in software are the way to achieve that, married with professionals who know how to do how to have conversations about process redesign and organizational change management. If you marry those two together, that's a way that you hit it, like what's personal to people, but also how to get it done in a way that's not disruptive. Of course, you're going to have money for all of that.
Yeah, I think that, go ahead.
Great. I want to open up for questions. I mean, time flies.
Oh, is it? Our panel's already done. Okay.
Chance to address you through questions. I want to try something new. I want to invite Alyssa Colella to start with the first question.
Yeah, Mr. Dowd, I was wondering, in the case you were talking about before with the employee whose access was never revoked, where did the FBI's job end in that case? Was your team responsible for just identifying that he was the threat, or kind of finding out what happened to all of that data from those 2 years, and what were the relevant practices, I guess, to trace that, and what were some digital breadcrumbs, I guess,
Oh,
that were relevant to that case?
that's a great question. So when it comes to digital breadcrumbs, when you have an insider, um, inside a thread, your digital breadcrumbs are very difficult to pick up because they mix in with everything else, right? Because the person had access, there was no anomalies. Now the question is, how far back are you logging the data? You know, um, in terms of what our job there was. So the way this guy was caught is because it's a sheer mistake of his was he had a personal laptop that he plugged into the network, and that's what sent the bells up. And they said, hey, you plugged in your laptop. First of all, who are you? Right? We can't find your records. And then it was kind of crazy. It evolved into a fist fight. The guy ran away, and there was blood, and he threw it. So we came in after that. So we came in after the fact that this guy was identified, and he escaped. Right. So then we came in. Our job was to build the case for the 1030 violation I just spoke to you guys about, collecting evidence for unauthorized and exceeding access. So then, first of all, we had to prove that it was him. Again, like what seems very easy in a normal world, in a judicial world, it's a task. To prove that you are you, like it's a task. There has to be a paper trail for it. So you do that. That's your email. The fact that you sent the email that's not enough. I have to show that you personally sent that email and that no one else had logged into your computer to send that email. And so again, the building of the evidence is kind of laborious. So once the guy so we tracked him down. He ran away. So we tracked him down, and then we collected evidence for the unauthorized intrusion, exceeding his authority, and then building the case. And he was just recently sentenced to 8 years.
Excellent.
So I'll just say one more thing. I mean, I just want to touch on what Mark said here is, the physical security versus computer security. And I think that's it's a very key thing for us to educate ourselves and everyone about it, that we are very used to physical security. We all understand why we need a door on our house. Okay. Most people don't understand why they need a firewall, why they need to protect their emails, because the damage on that, I would argue, is much more substantial than your physical security. The corporations used to be built and then the security was built around it. It has to be the other way around. I find from our perspective, it's a constant struggle to explain to someone what happens when you lose your access to your network. What happens when you've accidentally sent $2 million out and you cannot recover it? Unless you're a victim, you and I can pretty much guarantee it will not happen with them again, but there are thousands of victims out there. And then that's, to me, is a big struggle. And the cybercrime is just not sexy. Like it's not, oh, you got hacked. Oh man, that's too bad. My house got robbed into. Oh my goodness, let's call everybody in the world, right? That's the difference in attitude. And as the time goes on, if we can start shifting that, I think that is where like election damage, right? Like I'm going to talk. Like if someone was to physically go into a booth and rip out a machine and run away with it, the world would end at that point, right? As opposed to somebody from remotely doing it and doing a much bigger damage, and nobody really cares. Oh, it's a cyber hack. So I think that's a big struggle that we have to overcome, and it's going to take time, and unfortunately, some bad examples.
Excellent. Wow. This question is for law enforcement, Mr. Gibble. How are laws keeping up with the cybercrime?
Question.
I won't speak for federal, but they're not. It's not great. I spend most of my time trying to explain to attorneys and judges the laws that do exist, how we're going to prosecute. Kind of like Sahul said, if I can explain everyone knows what an assault is, a punch in the face, but to describe laws that some of these laws have been in existence for 15, 20 years, and they're either not used as often, or realistically, a lot of your judges, your senior judges they're of your grandparents' age, and that's something to think about when you're in a program now. I forgot my Temple connection is my brother-in-law is a Temple law grad. But before that, he was an engineer. So he has an engineering degree with a law degree. He started his own patent firm, is doing very well. If you have any aspirations for politics or, the judges are part of the law enforcement thing, and then it goes on to Senate seats and politics. And if you're in a cyber program now and you haven't figured it out, but you have an affinity for law, continue on with a law degree, and maybe we can make some changes there. But problem is things are moving so fast. Things I did 2 years ago, the basis is there, the foundation is there, but there was things we couldn't do 2 years ago that we can do now, and there was things that we could do 2 years ago that no longer, we don't even think about it because it's gone. That ship sailed.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very evolving field. I mean, just look at the headlines today, right? With the social media companies in the news trying to defend the law that was, protecting their ability to not be liable for what's on their sites. There's a court case right now, if you guys are interested. It's in the Supreme Court. It's called Van Buren versus United States. And so that is an example of, where cyber laws need to be updated, or the question in there is, what in 1030, what does exceeding authority mean? So there's a case right now in Supreme Court, which should be adjudicated, like I would imagine within a year, that will explain now the new laws behind what does it mean when you say he has exceeded his authority? Because that was always a question. Like if you have access and you do something that you're not supposed to, does 1030 apply to you? And I don't think in the past it did. So I think, so we are changing, but it's a very slow move.
Wow. So before I go into the next question, I would love for the panelists to share your contact information in the chat. So our participants that are interested in perhaps contacting you for more questions, they have a way to do that before we lose everyone. So the next question actually goes to the timing. Oh, I am going to put in the chat the program, the cyber defense program link for folks to look at as one of the alternatives to education. So that's my contribution. The next question has to do with quantum computing. We were talking about the timing and things. What is the timeline for quantum computing and its contribution? This is like the ideal investigations, data sources and things like that. How do you see quantum computing helping, and how quick do you think it's going to be happening? We could pass.
Yeah.
No.
It's still too theoretical, I think.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
I think it's being studied and tested. Perhaps it's too soon.
Yeah, I think everyone wants to get there as fast as possible. One thing I wanted to say is, talking about the court system, that's been a struggle for anything to do with computing for the courts to understand, because there's always been sort of this level of computers are for rocket scientists or whatever. But I mean, I think that these types of programs, they need to be everywhere. Everyone needs to be educated about this, not just people who write poetry need to be educated about this, because their poetry can be stolen. I mean, so I think that is a real shift in thinking that we as a nation have to have, that every person needs a computing education, and that includes information assurance and cybersecurity, because that permeates our entire lives. So
thank you. The next question is from Sina Adibi. With all the TV programs, being the nerdy guy sitting in the front of the computer, foiling the bad guys is a dream. What is the FBI or state police looking for when hiring for those vacancies?
Okay. All right, I'll go first. So if you are, I wrote this down, if you're multilingual, pri-military, have worked in the police, and you have a major in accounting and a second major in computer science, you're a perfect candidate for us. Okay. If you don't, like rest of us, like all of us, in the FBI, you can be a special agent, which is your gun-toting special agent. You can be a computer scientist, which is your, that's when your computer science degree and having like just unique and strong computer background is very helpful. You can be an Intel analyst where you can have a very strong computer background with strong writing skills to help, disseminate the intelligence. But to be an FBI agent, what I would tell you is that um, all of these skills are important. Um, but really that what we are looking for are investigators. These working cyber crime specifically, there are very few cases where you need like a very detailed cyber knowledge. If you have it, amazing. Like I would love to have you on my squad. But short of that, there are tons of resources available for us, both in terms of, like I said, we have computer scientists. We just hired 4 computer scientists right out of college, and they are going through the hard drives we're getting. They're writing codes for us. They're reversing malware. If you want to do that, that's an option available. We have a whole OTD branch at headquarters. I mean, they do some of the coolest stuff out there when it comes to like computers. But to be a special agent, like really, like it's a pretty broad field, broad set of skills, and we're looking for everyone in all different backgrounds.
Excellent.
I'll follow up, Suhail, just with that is my observation working with some other FBI and other federal agencies. The days of having an investigator and a tech person be the same person. Some agencies, federal agencies they're completely splitting that. State police at the state level, we do, if you were interested, you have to be a trooper first. So you have to be that badge and a gun for several years until a spot opens. We have analyst positions, civilian lab positions that, again, we don't deal, if you're in a cyber program and that's what you want, we don't deal with that as much. We're a lot more forensic based right now, but some of that forensics takes us into the cloud. And then at some point, really everything's becoming, where does reality end and the cyber start? But really any government, what you will get from government positions as opposed to private sector is we often take people right out of college for our civilian positions, maybe because they don't have the 3 years experience or they don't have a certain business, industry certification, and we'll pay for that. And that's why our turnover is a little bit quicker than some private industry, but it is an option. And you'll see the world differently coming from law enforcement or government sector going into private sector and vice versa.
Excellent. Mr. Wheeler, what about the city? Mark?
Sorry about that. I had trouble unmuting. We have very specific roles. It's not all based on investigation. So we do need, folks who have the ability to understand the policy implications and implications and how processes work within IT operations. So both the computer skills, communication skills, and just a very strong sense of curiosity for problem solving, I think, are necessary. But you have to have that training in cybersecurity for us, because we need you to come in with a working knowledge of the profession and the tools that are out there, as well as the current state of the software platforms that we would want to be utilizing and modernize to.
Excellent. I want to take the opportunity to share that in our program, Cyber Defense and Information Assurance, that we do what we call the industry-aligned activities. So we're trying to align different cyber activities from the classroom through different businesses. So we're doing a partnership with Clone Systems, for example, where we're scanning, right? We use their license, their scanner, to identify vulnerabilities and work through the cases. Because as Scott defined it once, we're looking to create and promote the unicorn, which is the multidisciplinary student, right? With software skills, development skills, and cyber skills, or different backgrounds and cyber skills, to be able to offer that well-rounded and T-shaped pipeline. Lee, you were going to say something.
Oh, I was typing in the chat, but outside of like actually working for the government, there are literally thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of jobs where you can do this type of investigative work. So I work for Centaur, the company I worked for. They employ, right now about 500 people who do this every day. And they do all levels of these types of services where they can be out investigating, they can do intelligence work, they can be writing policies for, there's a lot of work, particularly in the defense industry, to really, do this. So look for that too.
Excellent. We have one more questions and then I'll have to do the closing. I know time flies. So this one is from Pushkin Roy. What an emerging, not yet prevalent technology, what emerging but not yet prevalent technology poses the greatest threat to current or legacy systems? Like what is our biggest threat right now, but perhaps not emerging? What are some of the threats?
I mean, like, we keep talking about 5G and IoT, right? The Internet of Things, and with everything being connected in your house, I think we're still to see the kind of damage. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of advantages to having it, right? Your TV being able to order your milk from your fridge, right? There's a lot of value in that. But the damage that can be done if someone can hack into your TV or your fridge or your home systems, your cameras. We're not, I think it's happening, but we're just not seeing a lot of it so far. But I think as it goes out in the 5G technology and with the vehicles being possibly on 5G, I mean, I don't know, like it's a crazy world out there.
I think one big threat is old systems. Like our electrical grid and all of these types of things are very old. There's a lot of vulnerabilities there and they can be shut down. I think that, out in there are weapon systems right now protecting our country that have systems that are from the 70s. and they're being integrated with all of these things. So there's there's threats in those systems that are really hard to identify. And so from a perspective of having all this old technology and still it being part of infrastructure, I think is a situation we were investigating a lot at my company.
Wow. The hour has flown. So if you have any closing statements, I want to start with mine, thanking everybody, our panelists, for sharing such a wealth of information. And I want to remind everybody that the program, the Cyber Defense Program link is on the chat, and so is the contact information for our panelists. And any closing comments from our panelists, or Steve, yourself?
17 active questions. I just love the participation. That's all I'll say. It's great.
Yeah, please mark your calendar for January the 27th, where we're going to talk about cyber and healthcare.
Cool.
Anyone else? Jump in now.
Just real quick, cybersecurity starts with you. You're always going to know, even if you're the brand new person, you're going to know the network better than law enforcement. You're going to know better than your competitor. So it starts with you, and nothing's outside the box. Try to figure out some way that might benefit your organization and other organizations, and then just benefit society.
Great. I want to thank everyone and thank you for having me here. We love doing this because I think education is the best way to really tackle this. And then I'd like to introduce you to the latest antivirus that's out there now. So please be sure to use it. All right. All right, guys. Thank you.
Excellent. Mark or Lee?
Thank you. It was fun. I'm not as exciting as Suhail, so it's exciting to have him.
Thanks for having me. I appreciated hearing what Suhail and Mark and Lee had to say. It was great to participate.
Great. Thank you, folks. With this, we close this session. Thank you so much.
Thanks.